the newly discovered fossil Ardi? Would you have given special human, moral, ethical consideration to Lucy, or would you count Lucy as though she was a chimpanzee? Does this perhaps suggest to you that we shouldn't be in the business of drawing lines between species in this kind of way? Maybe these lines should be regarded as more fuzzy and less clear-cut. Our absolutist moralities that do draw hard and fast lines between humans and all other species, even taking a human fetus and calling that human, and whereas an adult chimpanzee is not and doesn't deserve the same moral consideration, is that consistent with science? These are ways in which science can at least inform moral discussions. You can, I suppose, make a utilitarian justification for obnoxious practices. You could make a utilitarian justification for torture. Moral philosophers sometimes pose the hypothetical case where the world is about to be blown up. Only one person knows the secret password to stop the doomsday bomb going off. Only one person knows the secret password to stop the doomsday bomb going off. This one person is a suicide bomber who refuses to give up the password. Are you right to torture him? And most people, I think, say you are. I mean, it's a horrible thing to torture somebody, but under those extreme conditions, to save the world, you would torture somebody. So, and that would be a utilitarian justification for an otherwise obnoxious practice such as torture.
Yeah, so that was Richard Dawkins. Hopefully you got something from that. The whole point is, look how futile it is. At what point do you decide a human is more important than an animal? See, here's what I did. I'm taking the absolutist position because it's a simple one and it makes sense to me. So because I cannot say that humans at any point in our evolution were more important to the grand spectrum of life than any other life form, I have to demote us. Why? Because I eat cow. I eat cow. I will not eat human. Now, you put me up on a mountain in the Andes with a soccer team, then we've crashed and it's been 25 days. Perspectives can change. You know, maybe it tastes like caribou. You don't know. And when you're starving, I'll bet you could fool yourself into that thought. I don't know. You don't know. You think you know. You think you know what you would do if you're in the mountains and there's a bunch of dead bodies laying around you and you got to decide whether you're going to eat a human. You think you know, but I don't think you do. Because I've been in a lot of situations before and I've read an extensive amount of literature on this, and that doesn't make me an expert. Nobody's an expert in my view. Some people are more experienced with some issues than others. That's about it. That people make decisions that surprise themselves when it comes to survival and natural reactions, fear, anger, frustration, love, and other things that will make you fucking crazy in the head. Okay? So you don't know, really. And I think you're at a stronger spot in your life if you accept that you don't know till you're faced with it. You might have a vibe. You might have some past behavior that you can project a guess upon this future hypothetical on, but you don't know. You don't know for sure till it happens. And nobody does. And if you believe you do, if you're so certain that you do, have you never been surprised by your behavior in a given situation? Where you thought you would do one thing, but you in fact did something else that may have been radically different? Never? So you're that predictable to yourself in these extreme situations? Well, good for you. That's amazing. What a terribly hard constitution you must have to be able to know exactly what you're going to do in every strange and awkward and unreal situation. Because if I got a situation for you today that we're going to talk about, supposedly it's kind of like a psychopath test. Not so much, though. I wish they wouldn't call it that. Because what you choose, I'm not going to ruin this for you. We're just going to do it. We're just going to do it. Get ready. This is supposed to tell you if you're a psychopath or not, and I want you to decide if you give it any validity.
about the psychopath's enhanced killer instinct, their finely tuned vulnerability antennae. But it may surprise you to know that there are some situations in which psychopaths are actually more adept at saving lives than they are at taking them. So let me give you an example of what I mean by that, okay? Imagine you've got a train and it's hurtling down a track. In its path, 5 people are trapped on the line and cannot escape. Fortunately, you can flick a switch which diverts the train down a fork in that track away from those 5 people, but at a price. There is another person trapped down that fork and the train will kill them instead. Question: should you flick the switch? Now, most people have little trouble deciding what to do under those circumstances. Though the thought of flicking the switch isn't exactly a nice one, the utilitarian choice, as it were, killing just the one person instead of the 5, represents the least worst option, okay? But now let me give you a variation. You've got a train speeding out of control down a track, and it's going to plough into 5 people on the line. But this time you are standing behind a very large stranger on a footbridge above that track. The only way to save the people is to heave the stranger over. He will fall to a certain death, but his considerable bulk will block the train, saving 5 lives. Now we've got what we might call a real dilemma on our hands, okay? While the score in lives is precisely the same as in the first scenario, 5-1, one's choice of action appears far trickier. Now, why should that be? Well, the reason, it turns out, all boils down to temperature, okay? Case 1 represents what we might call an impersonal dilemma. It involves those areas of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, the posterior parietal cortex, in particular the anterior paracingulate cortex, the temporal pole, and the superior temporal sulcus, bit of neuroanatomy for you there, primarily responsible for what we call cold empathy, for reasoning and rational thought. Case 2, on the other hand, represents what we might call a personal dilemma. It involves the emotion center of the brain, known as the amygdala, the circuitry of hot empathy, what we might call the feeling of feeling what another person is feeling. Now, psychopaths, just like most normal members of the population, have no trouble at all with case 1. They flick the switch and the train diverts accordingly, killing just the one person instead of the 5. But this is where the plot thickens. Quite unlike normal members of the population, psychopaths also experience little difficulty with case 2. Psychopaths, without a moment's hesitation, are perfectly willing to chuck the fat guy over the rails if that's what the doctor orders. Now, moreover, this difference in behavior has a distinct neural signature. The pattern of brain activation in both normal people and psychopaths is identical on the presentation of the impersonal moral dilemma, but radically different when things start to get a bit more personal. Imagine that I were to hook you up to a brain scanner, a functional magnetic resonance imaging machine, and were to present you with those 2 dilemmas, okay? What would I observe as you went about trying to solve them? Well, at the precise moment that the nature of the dilemma switches from impersonal to personal, I would see the emotion center of your brain, your amygdala, and related brain circuits, the medial orbitofrontal cortex, for example, light up like a pinball machine. I would witness the moment, in other words, when emotion puts its money in the slot. But in psychopaths, I would see precisely nothing. And the passage from impersonal to personal would slip by unnoticed, because that emotion neighborhood of their brains, that emotional zip code, has a neural curfew. And that's why they're perfectly happy to chuck that fat guy over the side without even batting an eye.
Now, first of all, I don't see why they're picking on fat people, considering that this church is composed, the leadership at least, of fatter gray cranks. However, you know, let's stop for a second. You heard the scenario. You may have been surprised at what a couple of your own answers were, but don't make this more than it is. This man gave an extremely limited scope view intentionally to show a point. When you go to YouTube and you look this video up, the first thing you're going to see is everybody saying, wow, a fat man ain't going to stop a train. Stop right there. That's not what he's doing. That's not what he's doing. You might have to listen to it again. All he's saying is that presented with a moral dilemma in which you have to elect to lose one life to save 5 or something similar, I personally, from back in my military days on, just believe that if you gotta kill one to save 2, you do. You just do. It's the only. Maybe it's like a magic 8-ball to me. It's just the easiest way to solve, and it's not a very sound argument to put forth that this is a utilitarian murder I'm involved in, whether it's through neglect or action, and it's going to save more lives than it's going to cost. Okay? What he's saying is that once you have to get into the act of literally actively killing someone in order to save someone else's life, parts of your brain that will be employed and active are different between the normal, we'll call it healthy, psychological mind and the psychopath or the sociopath, which is the light version of psychopath. Here's what I think about this. First of all, let me just keep it simple in my thinking. Do I throw the fat guy over the tracks? No, I don't. I'm not the judge, jury, and executioner here. Okay? I would have to be 1,000% absolute certain that throwing this man over the railing would save many more lives. And even if I were, who am I to value that number over his? And you say, well, Kevin, you just said that it goes back to your military days, that if you can save 5 by killing 1, you do it. That's true. That's because in a military scenario, you're thinking almost automatically of expenditures in personal assets. That means we're spending lives. It's what we do. It's what the military is willing to do for you. This is not the norm at a train station. This is not where we decide how many to spend so we can save some. First of all, I would have to be so certain that these people were going to die that there was no doubt in my mind. And I would have to be so certain, which would be impossible, that this one fat dude was going to slow the train enough to save them, that there was zero doubt in my mind, and that would be impossible. That makes this scenario impossible for me. However, let's go ahead and put some what-ifs in. What if I did believe that he was big enough to slow down the train enough to save the 5 people? What do? I don't throw him over. Because in that position, in that moment of judgment, I cannot say, I'm going to kill this man, send him to his death, this stranger that I've never met, who didn't sign up for anything. I'm going to kill him to save 5 people, and I don't know any of them. It doesn't make sense then, unless you're a strict utilitarian in your murder theory and philosophy. Now, there could be situations under which I might do that. In fact, what I'd probably do is I'd go ahead and jump down in front of the train, see if I could slow it down some. And if I didn't, I wouldn't be alive to feel guilty about not throwing the fat guy over. I'd be okay with that. Yeah, I went down in flames, went down like a pro. That's probably what I'd do. Hell, I may grab the fat guy if it were going to save children, because then we get into a whole nother thinking mode, and jump both of us over the rail. You know? Who knows? You don't know what you're going to do. I just got done saying this earlier in the show. You don't know what you're going to do till you're faced with a situation like that. But my immediate judgmental mind, thinking rationally, is not going to choose to kill a man over the chance that maybe it saves some other people down the track, with so many uncertainties there, and there are a lot. But that's not what he was going for. Again, he was going to show you how the psychopath doesn't have empathy for others. They often can imitate it. They watch people and they learn and they can mirror. And the more, what would I call them? The more pronounced psychopaths, the more established ones, the ones that the psychiatrists have very little doubt about, like maybe this guy's just borderline psychopath, Maybe he's just more of an extreme version of a general sociopath and not quite to the psychopath level yet.